It's come about to be. It was no, things are really happening that I was seeing and that other people were seeing, and we're not alone in this. And so, Dave and I were talking that this ought to be tonight. We wanted to have what we call basically a situation report, just some thing that we found and that we need to make sure that everybody is aware of, and that we need to be paying attention. We actually need to start taking some actions. And so we're going to get started real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Dave, you want to come on up here? And we've gone through and picked up, and a lot of what we're going to show you is videos, newspaper clippings, things like this that we've noticed. But it is a reflection of what's going on in the time, and we really need to be paying attention and doing what we can to get people to wake up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and we'll get the show on the road. No, you're going.
All right. Okay, I got a lot of stuff to cover. So we're going to move kind of fast. Got a couple of quick things first. There's a lot of material in here, and I've got some things that you can do about these issues. So I made some handouts for them. However, the Lord's blessed me with some talents, but word processing isn't one of them. So if you get really persnickety about the way things are lined out or how the margins are, you may not want to pick one of these up. But if you just want to be reminded of what we covered, they'll be in the back. You can pick one up on the way out if you're interested. So most of you guys know me, so I'm not going to go into a lot of credentials, but I will say a couple of things, mostly that, sorry, I got to need to use these readers to see what I'm doing here. I am an American. I served the country in 2 different branches of the military, different times. And I'm half white and I identify as male, which means that I'm as white as Barack Obama, and neither one of us are as white as Elizabeth Warren. So that's my introduction to me and my qualifications. So what we're going to go through tonight is what the military calls a sit rep. And this is so that you're aware of your surroundings and that you can take action to avoid threats or maybe even put yourself in a more advantageous situation. So we're going to cover some of the risks that we face right now. And there will be a few videos on this, and you'll get to watch those too to kind of illustrate some of these points. Right now, one of the biggest risks we have is political risk. And a lot of that involves results from getting ourselves involved in foreign conflicts. And some of those things may be able to come back on us. You know, we're supporting the Ukrainian army against the Russians, and whatever side you take in that, what you need to be aware of is that Russia is still a nuclear power with submarines capable of bringing that fight to our soil. So don't imagine for a moment that war is off over there. That war could be here on our soil anytime. And they just launched the new Poseidon submarine that has a nuclear powered torpedo, not just nuclear tip, but nuclear powered. So it can cover half the world's ocean autonomously without the submarine. And then they've also got those hypersonic nuclear missiles with MIRVs. Anybody familiar with MIRVs? You know what that means? Multiple reentry vehicle. So a lot of people think that a missile, and some of them do, they take off from here, they land over here and blow up. But with a MIRV, what happens is that missile takes off, it goes into space, becomes a satellite with multiple warheads on it, then goes over the target and drops warheads down on different targets on its way. So we have that capability. The Russians have that capability. So just be aware of that. But on this, yes, ma'am. No, I haven't heard that, but okay. So, well, that would be interesting if he tries to do that. But what's one of the things that's important is how did all this stuff get started? So I've got a couple videos for you to watch, because I think most people don't really understand how all this got started. So could you play that first one? Retired colonel from the United States Marine Corps, very familiar with the history of all this, and was a senator from the state of Virginia.
After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, NATO began advancing aggressively eastward, finally reaching Ukraine. In 2014, Ukraine needed financial help. Russia and the European Union made competing financial proposals. Ukraine chose Russia's aid package, which triggered an immediate response. Central Intelligence Agency and British MI6 organized a violent revolutionary coup that overthrew Ukraine's legitimately elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. The two Donbas republics declared independence, and in response, the revolutionary government of Ukraine made war on them. Over 14,000 people have died in that war, and this was prior to the actions of Russia in Ukraine. After the 2014 coup, the U.S. and NATO flooded Ukraine with weapons and advisors, helping them to prepare for a war against Russia. As tensions mounted, Russia made repeated calls for peace, but the trap had been set by NATO. By late 2021, Ukraine had amassed many thousands of troops for an attack against Donbas, which lies right on the Russian border. President Putin was desperately trying to avoid war. In December of 2021, he advanced specific written proposals to NATO. But NATO was hell-bent on war and dismissed his proposals.
No, she was a undersecretary of state under Hillary Clinton, and who is the Hines guy that came after her? Kerry, John Kerry. So this retired Marine Corps colonel just explained that we organized a coup against Viktor Yanukovych. Well, she made a phone call
in early February of 2014.
That's it. She made a phone call to the ambassador of U.S. ambassador to Ukraine to discuss overthrowing the Ukrainian government and who they would put in there. That phone call got captured, and you're going to hear part of it now. This is...
In early February of 2014, as the Maidan crisis was getting more violent, there was a phone call that was intercepted. It was a call between the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt.
Questions of credibility are being raised after a private chat between two top U.S. diplomats was leaked online.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay. Good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
So you had this remarkable phone call where you have these two senior officials of the U.S. government apparently talking about a coup or how they were planning to restructure the government of Ukraine.
Fuck the EU.
No, exactly.
I'm not saying the whole U.S. government feels that way. There is division on this, but the neoconservative element wants very much to change the strategic dynamic in Eastern Europe.
So she mentioned President Biden in that phone call with the ambassador a couple of times. So President Biden was deeply involved in this overthrow of Ukraine, and it has a lot to do with why we're over there again today. And I'm not trying to take sides, but I think it's important for people to understand where all this really came from. So we have another short clip that will explain the Biden's dealings over there and some of the other pressure that got put on the Ukrainian government as a result of not just President Biden, but also his son, Hunter Biden, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with his dealings overseas, or at least some of them.
The training and effort that went into getting the Ukrainians ready for this kind of war over the last 8 years. The United States, Canada, Britain, other allies really helped train the Ukrainians in small unit leadership, command and control, operational maneuver, the kinds of things you're seeing them do now. It's not just about the weapons. It's about the skills and the capabilities that they and the leadership that they're exerting on the battlefield. And that wasn't by accident. They really have transformed from a Soviet era, very Russian dominant sort of military, very top down, rigid doctrinal military, to one that's much more Western aligned in terms of the way they think and act and actually encourage initiative on the battlefield. Again, that wasn't an accident. That was the work of the United States and so many other allies over.
Speaking about, but what you'll notice, this just came out recently from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon just admitted that we've been involved in there since 2014, and that we have for 8 years we've been helping Western Ukraine bomb Eastern Ukraine. So this isn't as cut and dry, good guy, bad guy as a lot of the news media would have you believe. So you know, we've given them $40 billion for weapons. We've been giving them money for weapons to kill people in Eastern Ukraine for 8 years prior to this. So this didn't just start out of the clear blue. So the next little clip will explain a little more Biden's involvement with that.
But Adam Schiff doesn't talk about Joe Biden and his son walking away with millions of dollars from Ukraine.
Somebody ought to look at whether or not Joe Biden had the prosecutor fired in an improper way.
Republicans have been pointing a lot of fingers at former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter's dealings in Ukraine. Trump and his GOP allies claim Biden used his power as vice president to help his son by withholding foreign aid from Ukraine in order to pressure the government to fire a top prosecutor who was supposed to be investigating the company Hunter Biden was working for. But those claims don't add up. Here's what really happened. It all started in the spring of 2014. Ukraine's pro-Russian government had just been overthrown in favor of a government that would form more alliances with the U.S. and Western Europe. Vice President Joe Biden traveled to Ukraine to meet with government leaders and spearhead U.S.-Ukrainian anti-corruption efforts. In April of that year, Hunter Biden had just taken a job with Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian oil and gas company with ties to the pro-Russian Ukrainian government. As a member of Burisma's board of directors, Hunter Biden's primary duty was to attend board meetings and energy forums in Europe, and he was reportedly paid $50,000 a month. The new job raised some eyebrows back in the U.S. because it came at the same time the company's co-owner was being investigated by British officials for money laundering, and as the vice president was spearheading efforts to root out corruption in Ukraine. That prompted questions from reporters over whether the job posed a conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of one.
Hunter Biden and other members of the Biden family are obviously private citizens, and where they work does not reflect an endorsement by the administration.
Then in February of 2015, Viktor Shokin was sworn in as Ukraine's prosecutor general. He pledged to root out corruption and said Burisma was one of several entities he planned to investigate as part of that effort. But critics say Shokin did the opposite and was actually aiding corrupt actors by blocking investigations, including the UK-led inquiry into Burisma. Vice President Biden publicly called for his ouster, even saying the U.S. withheld $1 billion in loan guarantees to Ukraine to get Shokin fired.
I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
But Biden wasn't Shokin's only critic. By 2016, the European Union, International Monetary Fund, and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development were all calling for Shokin to be removed from office. There has never been any evidence of wrongdoing by Hunter Biden. Shokin's replacement told the Washington Post that he, quote, did not violate anything, and claims the vice president tried to stop the investigation have been denied by U.S. officials and Ukrainian anti-corruption activists.
Okay, so everybody's entitled to their opinion. I don't really agree with the International Monetary Fund or the Central Bank of Europe as far as the corruption.
With all due respect,
if you remember when the general or colonel was speaking, he mentioned that Ukraine was in financial trouble and that they got competing proposals from the European Central Bank and Russia. Well, Viktor Yanukovych went with Russia, and then we sponsored the coup. So that those companies that say there was no corruption, they were trying to get that loan to Ukraine. So they have a dog in this fight. So in my view, they have no credibility on this sort of thing. And I would encourage you to read or look into something called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It will explain how loan guarantees are used to put leverage on foreign countries. So but in a nutshell, that's how we got to where we're at right now. So I'm not saying that these things are good. I wish this war would stop, but our involvement in it puts all of us at risk. The Russians are not the Soviet Union anymore, for one thing. And two, they do have nuclear submarines that they can park right off our coast. So it isn't the same as us taking on a bunch of guys in the Middle East that can't touch us here in America. Russia has a modern Navy and a modern Air Force that can touch us here on our own soil. So that's our first risk and political risk. Second risk is social unrest that destabilizes government. So on the 7th of this month, Forbes magazine reported that 60 high-ranking UK leaders resigned, and then they were followed by the resignation or announcement of the resignation of Boris Johnson. Everybody here familiar with that? Basically, the whole UK government, everybody that is anybody, is gone now. The next day, on the 8th, New York Post reported that former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was assassinated. And there's a lot of speculation about how that happened, who did it, and why they did it. They have somebody in custody, but these are just indicators, threat indicators, for you to keep in mind. On the 12th of this month, New York Post reports that Sri Lankan president fled the country as protesters stormed his residence. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future, but we're starting to see the fall of different governments and attacks on certain political leaders. And I don't advocate violence, but I'm just making you aware, because these are the things that, if you're not aware of these threats, you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay. In addition to this, is not really so much a political, but it's probably politically motivated once we get into investigating it. But also, the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed just recently. I don't know if you know about those, but you should look into them and what they said, and give you some indication of possible motivations for whoever or whatever destroyed those. Okay, so we're going to move on from there to financial risk. I'm going to just kind of blaze through these. If you have questions, raise your hands and we'll talk about them in more detail. The following crypto currency exchanges halted depositors' withdrawals. On the 12th of June, Celsius halted depositor withdrawals. On June 17th, that'll be 5 days later, Babel Finance locked depositors out of their accounts. On the 23rd, a few days later, CoinFlex also locked depositors out of their accounts. So if you had accounts on these exchanges, you may or may not ever get your money back. There's a couple others that are in default that I've learned about since then, and 2 of the CEOs are missing, and there's people looking for them. So you may not get your money back from that. In addition to that, don't know if you've been paying attention, but there's all kinds of bank runs going on in Hong Kong right now, and other banks in China. Okay, so moving on. U.S. currency, reserve currency status is being challenged right now. So we'll go through a little history and then what's going on now. So August 15th, 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window on U.S. currency. Prior to that, you could turn in U.S. currency for gold. A lot of countries realized that we were printing more money than we had gold, and they started asking for their gold. And President Nixon said, we're not doing that anymore. We're cutting gold off. I don't tell you that to say that gold is better or worse. I'm just telling you that so you understand where we're going. So a couple years later, September 6, 1974, Henry Kissinger signed a defense pact with Saudi Arabia in exchange for oil-backed dollar, known as the petrodollar. Most of you guys are familiar with that, I assume. So basically what that meant is that Saudi Arabia would now only sell oil on the world market for U.S. dollars, which required all governments or countries on the world to have a certain amount of dollars if they need to buy oil. This is one of the reasons that the U.S. government can print tons and tons of currency and you don't feel the inflation right now. That's because 3/4 of all American dollars in existence are outside of the country so that other countries can buy oil, and we're exporting our inflation to other countries. So while we feel it, they feel it worse because their currencies generally are worth less than ours. So that's just a history lesson. And now we're going to come to today, or nearly today. Last year, August 24th, Russia and Saudi Arabia signed a mutual defense pact, the same one that we signed with them back in 1971. So why would Saudi Arabia need us and Russia to defend them? They probably don't, but they probably don't trust us because they saw what we did with all these sanctions where we took private people's property. A lot of countries are paying attention to what we're doing, and they're wanting to get out of our currency. So that was last August. This year, on March 23rd, Russian President Putin required payment in rubles or gold for Russian oil for what he termed, or wheat, from what he termed unfriendly Western nations. So now anybody can buy oil from the Russians with either, well, they can't use U.S. currency, but they can use rubles or gold. This essentially tied gold to the gold, sort of gold backed the ruble, that they're tied together on oil. So that's another chip in our reserve currency status. That's important to understand because if we lose that, we will not be able to export our inflation all over the world, and all that inflation will come back here to us. So then on this month, on the 12th of this month, WION, which is a East Indian news reporting, and I encourage you to check them out. They're probably one of the only truly reasonable news organizations covering world events. But they reported that the Reserve Bank of India, so that was yesterday, Reserve Bank of India announces Indian rupee swaps for international trade challenging the U.S. dollar. So that they're going to use the Indian rupee as sort of a world reserve currency. Now there's more sort of intermediaries in there. There's some more hoops you have to jump through to do it, but they're doing this primarily because the U.S. is putting all these sanctions on everybody, and not everybody likes it. A lot of countries don't feel like they have to be in our war, and they're tired of us pushing them around with the finances. Okay, so and this is kind of just a note on what I just said. Domestic international trust in U.S. financial institution was shaken by Western government sanctions, seizing private citizens' assets in Europe, U.S., and Canada for political reasons. You might remember when the Canadian truckers were protesting that they and anybody that supported them, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police seized their bank accounts. Well, I had a bank account up there because I like to take my sailboat up there, and I kept a certain amount of money in there, so I didn't have to convert back and forth. And I also saw the crazy money printing that was going on here. I didn't think the Canadians would be as stupid as we were, but I didn't count on Justin Trudeau. Well, as soon as I saw that happen, I spent that money down just as fast as I could. I didn't want to take it out because I was afraid they'd ask me why, and then they'd lock it up. So, okay, now right now, these are a list of nations that are currently in a hyperinflationary state. And you may have known that there was a print came out today. It said our inflation is at 9.1%. And I'm sure if you go and buy things, you're feeling like it's a lot more than that. But these are nations currently declared in current hyperinflation status, and this list is going to grow. Sudan, Venezuela, Lebanon, Syria, Zimbabwe, Turkey, Suriname, Argentina, Ethiopia, and Iran. They're all experiencing that right now. And it appears that more of us are on that way. So we're going to move on to security risks. These are risks that could become personal to your physical well-being. This year, so far, since January 1st, in the United States, we've had 15 mass shootings. That's one every other week that we've had this year. So my point is not to scare you. My point is to make you aware and don't make yourself vulnerable to one of these things. There's things you can do to lessen your chances of being caught up in one of these things. There's been mass protests at the homes of Supreme Court justices. I'm sure you're aware of that. That's kind of a dangerous situation. And we know that we've been in a sort of a quasi without real law situation for a couple of years where the police selectively enforce the law on some people, but not other people. And so you need to be aware of that if you are not on the right side, and when you want to back the blue, I'm not saying don't back the blue, but I'm saying, you've been doing a lot of really bad things over the last couple of years. Maybe not our guys, but police all around the world. So just make sure you don't put yourself in an undue risk. Washington Examiner is also reporting this year that U.S. illegal immigration is expected to top records at 2.1 million. Which that's just a projection for 2022. Could be less, could be more. Protesters also we mentioned this earlier, overthrew the president of Sri Lanka. Currently, I don't know if you're aware of this, I assume you are, we have Dutch farmers protesting. Now, it's hard to find a more leftist country than the Netherlands, and they're pretty peaceful people. So there's got to be something really going on before Dutch farmers get twisted and knot about it and wrapped around the axle. However, that call has grown because they're going to lose about half of their farms, and the government wants them to cull about half of their cattle. This is all to meet UN and WEF climate goals, right? They want them to reduce the nitrogen in the soil and methane. However, they've recently been joined by Polish and German farmers who are concerned about the same thing. It's really an interesting thing. I remember talking with my son about this back when, you remember when the Bundys were having their standoff with the police? That was a wake-up moment for me because cowboys are generally very patriotic people. And in that 1 year, we saw cowboys having a Mexican standoff with federal troops twice in 1 year. I told my son, that's a step change in our country. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but that is not normal to see cowboys standing off with armed federal agents. Okay. Then you may have known that this week, the New York City posted a public service announcement on what actions you should take should a nuclear attack happen in your neighborhood. I didn't really think their advice was that bad. I worked in this field for a long time. But it should be an indicator to you that things may be getting worse than they are. And most Americans, I'm sure, are not thinking about the fact that the Russians have the ability to bring that here. We haven't had war on our soil since the Civil War, unless you count that little thing that happened in Pearl Harbor. But believe me, war on your soil is a terrible, terrible thing. It's one thing for you to be behind it when it's happening to people on the other side of the world. When it's happening in your neighborhood, it's going to be a different thing completely. Okay, Scientific American reports that 16. Now this is something to think about for your threat indicators. Okay. Scientific American reports that 16.6% of Americans are using psychiatric drugs, some sort of antidepressants. And if you're using that, I'm not trying to nail you if you're one of those people, but that's a lot of people using those things. Also, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health reports that 14% of Americans use illicit drugs regularly. So what happens if those supply chains get interrupted? If you have roughly 30% of the population that can't hold themselves together without these things, keep in mind that our supply chains are still fragile. So take action if that's you to make sure you have a good supply of these things to get you to a tough spot. Okay, so I'm going to move on to food security risks. This is one of the bigger sections in this. I don't know if you were aware of it or not, but the last 2 years, locusts have infested farms in Africa and the Middle East, and they've lost huge amounts of their crops in the last 2 years. Australia also lost pretty much their whole crop in 2020 and a large portion of it in 2021. And the reason for this may interest you. In 2020, they lost the crop because the government locked everybody down and they couldn't go out and harvest the crop. And the problem in 2021 was all the mice that infested everything because they were eating all the food that didn't get harvested the day before. And they ruined most of a significant portion of the crop in 2021. So there's a deficit in production there. In addition to that, China has lost huge portions of their agricultural output in the last 2 years due to massive flooding from their Three Gorges Dam project. In fact, they've had to breach a lot of those dams. And as a result of that, a lot of people think that, China bought all this grain because they knew that the Russians were going to go into Ukraine. No, that's not why they did it. They did it because they bought 70% of the world's grain because the flooding in their country the last 2 years wiped everything out. And they have to feed over 1 billion people. So it may have been a plot, but I don't think so. I think it's mostly they needed to feed the people that they had. I wish we had politicians that thought about the people in our country. Okay, in addition to that, Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan produce 49% of global wheat, corn, and sunflower exports. Those exports are impeded by war and Western sanctions. The WEF, you guys all know who that is, right? WEF. That's people that really run everything. It's all these bankers. World Economic Forum, I guess they called that. Their climate goals threaten agricultural production going forward. These are the things that are going on in the Netherlands. And then you're all familiar with the fuel shortages. There's a diesel and diesel exhaust fluid shortages mainly stem from the railroads forcing people to reduce their shipments of this. But that is a major impediment to the supply chain because trucks, tractors, trains, and ships all use diesel. So be aware of that. If you're driving a gas car and you don't care what diesel costs, just remember, even those ships bringing that stuff from China, they don't get here without diesel. Luckily, my diesel's old enough I don't need this exhaust fluid, but this diesel exhaust fluid, these newer trucks, they're designed to not run without it, and they will slowly grind to a halt. And then there's other threats to that supply chain we'll talk about that were basically stem from some politics. Arkansas Online reported that federal water managers, we're still talking agriculture here, federal water managers in California reduce water allocation for agriculture to zero. California the state regulators and the water supplies that they manage have reduced agricultural water allocation to 15%. Last year, 2021, 200,000 acres of fertile land in California was left fallow, and thousands of acres that were planted didn't get harvested last year. So this is affecting the stockpile that we're living off of right now. VerdiMagazine.com reports that California farmers produce 25% of America's annual food supply. Okay, so we got a real problem with water in California. And that's not just for mowing your lawn or, keeping your lawn green. Sri Lanka begins implementation of UN climate goals in 2021, or actually in 2015. They started that. In 2021, part of that was that the goals, they banned chemical fertilizers in their country. Production dropped to 40%. Citizens began to starve, and they've overthrown their government. So that's a food risk and political risk. May 13th of this year, India banned exports of wheat over concerns about domestic supplies. That's not going to be a problem for us, but it's going to be a problem for Africa. Fires or other interruptions experienced at the following U.S. suppliers of food so far in 2022: Azure Standard, Taylor Farms, Gem State Processing, Maricopa Food Pantry, and Shearer Foods. Had some sort of interruption. Most of these are fires or explosions. Western sanctions stopped exports of fertilizers from Russia. You're probably aware that 2,000 cows died in Midwest due to overheating, or at least that's what they say. Who am I to argue? I'm not a rancher. And then this is a roundabout agricultural risk because trucks move this food once it's made. But California has instituted a ban on owner-operator truck drivers. It's idled 70,000 trucks in California. Those trucks are not going to be hauling food from California to you. Okay, so that covers food. Anybody have questions about that? Okay. We're going to move on to energy risks in 2022. We have a continued ban on drilling on federally controlled land. Russia shut down Nord Stream 1 natural gas pipeline to Europe. They're shutting it down for 10 days for scheduled maintenance. Apparently that's a normal thing they do, so I don't really think it's a big deal, but a lot of people are afraid they won't turn it back on. And the way they've been treated by Europe, I'm not taking sides, but if it was me, I wouldn't be giving them anything either. The XL pipeline project here in the United States and Canada is still sidelined per presidential edict. Western sanctions killed the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline to Europe. They were trying to build another one, and our sanctions wiped that out. So Europe, you may know that they pretty much shut down all their coal-fired power plants, all their nuclear power plants. They were going to do the green thing, and they went to natural gas, all of which came from Russia. You remember President Trump warned them about that. Speaking of President Trump, and we were talking earlier, we're going to back up just a little bit. We were talking about the stuff going on in Ukraine. I have one more video about, remember, this Victoria Nuland was involved with this coup. Anybody here familiar with John Bolton? Yeah, John Bolton, that guy. We got a little video about him where he admits to doing these sorts of things. So you play that real quick. And it talks, he has a few things to say about President Trump, who warned all these big thinkers in Europe about the natural gas situation. So you play.
With all due respect, one doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work.
And you cited your expertise having planned coups.
I'm not going to get into the specifics, but
successful coups?
Well, I wrote about Venezuela in the book, and it turned out not to be successful. Not that we had all that much to do with it, but I saw what it took for an opposition to try and overturn an illegally elected president, and they failed. The notion that Donald Trump was half as competent as the Venezuelan opposition is laughable. But I think there's another...
I feel like there's other stuff you're not telling me, though.
I'm sure there is.
Okay, so you'll note that he didn't think a whole lot of President Trump, even though he worked for him. And this is a man who has a long history of undermining governments around the world. And I guess I should have said this before. Any opinions expressed are mine, not necessarily those of Stand Up for Idaho. So I want to give Stand Up for Idaho for that, because I got strong opinions about this guy. There are people I think have committed crimes against humanity and should be held accountable for that. This man is among them. Any rate, back on energy risk, but that's what that whole deal was. This incompetent President Trump was the one that warned Europeans about, hey, maybe you don't want to be solely beholden to the Russians for natural gas. The 8th of June in Freeport, Texas, natural gas export terminal explodes. They're still investigating that. Now, Europe is really needing natural gas shipped in from other places, and now one of these export terminals just blew up last month. 2 days later, in Medford, Oklahoma, fire breaks out natural gas fractionation facility run by One OK. It sounded like One Oklahoma. It's a fractionator, so it just makes all the different products off of natural gas. I used to run one of those, so I'm familiar. And this is just a special consideration for you guys to think about right now, because this is a threat that a lot of people aren't thinking about, and it has vast ramifications. Lake Mead is at 28%. It's 178 feet below full pool. Lake Mead supplies water and power to 25 million Americans in California, Nevada, and Arizona. So if you stop and think about 25 million people with no water, Las Vegas depends on this, Los Angeles depends on this. If there's no water where you live, that's a civilization-ending event. Just go to the Salton Sea in California, and you'll see land developments that are completely abandoned. You can't live there if there's no water. And so if you think about what the ramification that has for the real estate market in Las Vegas and California, and where are those people going to go when they leave those places? That's something we should be thinking about, because we may have a stake in that. So keep that in mind. And it's not just water for people taking showers. That's water for agriculture. That's also power for pumps and things for agriculture. So we need to keep an eye on that. Now, I did a little bit of study on this when Hoover Dam was constructed in 1936. And I couldn't get a population for Las Vegas. At least I couldn't find one for that year. But in 1940, the population, anybody have an idea what the population of Las Vegas was in 1940? It was 8,400 people. Yeah, 8,400 people. It's just a little town in the desert. Anybody have a guess how many people live in there now? Just in the city? 662,000 people. That's orders of magnitude larger population than when that dam was constructed to supply their needs. In addition, in 1940, Los Angeles had just over 1.5 million people. They now have 9.8 million people. So 10 times, almost one order of magnitude increase in the population, all drinking off of that water supply and using the power from that. And when I looked at this website on the data for Lake Mead, it said at least this month they got 128% of normal rainfall in that drainage. That's just July. But honestly, even if they had normal water, if you've got that amount of population growth using that water, you're going to have problems. Okay? There's only so much that goes in the Colorado River, and there are 4 states that have water rights on that river before it goes into Lake Mead. And if those states exercise those rights, it's going to be bad news for the states that are downstream from that. And anybody that's been in farming or fishing knows that there's wars started over water. So that's just special consideration, but it should be something that's on your mind. Because if those people don't have power and they don't have water, they're not just going to go without it. They're going to get it from somewhere else. And we have some of the cheapest power and somewhat abundant water here, but they're going to be wanting to get water and power from somewhere else, and that's going to affect you. Okay, So, a lot of downer stuff, right? I apologize for that, but I'm not going to leave you in the cold. These are things that you can do because I want to give you guys ways to shield yourself as much as you can. So these are suggestions that I have. You can take them or leave them. But first and foremost, beginning and end, if you believe in the Creator, pray. Pray before you try everything else, and pray again after you try everything else, okay, on this list. And get as close to Him as you can. Second thing, reach out to your neighbors and love them. Get to know the people that live around you. When we did the talk on neighborhoods and cities, livable cities, one of the problems, I brought this up then, is that we all have these big wide streets, and we all have these big houses with like 3-car garages all across the front. And a lot of people hire other people to mow their lawns, and they've got these little remote control things. So when they come into their house, they just hit the remote control, the garage door goes up, they drive in, they shut the garage door, and then they can live next door to somebody for 10 years and not know who they are, anything about them. So I'm encouraging you, if you're one of those people, to reach out to your neighbors, get to know them, and be good to them, because you're going to need them in all likelihood very soon. In addition, while you're doing that, seek out the vulnerable and protect them. I got a couple other videos to play right now because they deal with this certain subject, but there's been a lot of rash of people being robbed at grocery stores for their groceries, and people being followed home and having their groceries stolen from them. I didn't get a video of that because nobody's videoed it, but I've got a video of some people being robbed in grocery stores. And then just an indicator of this, we all have a very thin veil of civility overall in our country. It varies from neighborhood to neighborhood, but by and large, it's very thin. You'll see how thin that is just about every Black Friday at Christmas time, when people try and kill each other over cheap Chinese crap that there's some sale on. And so I got 2 videos here. The first one would be on the people being robbed in the stores, and that has to do with vulnerable people, and we'll talk about that one after the video. And then the second one, right after that, is a group of young ladies that just destroy a store over the price of extra fry sauce. Okay, so can you play those real quick?
Caught on camera a violent grocery store theft. A woman dragged trying to stop thieves from stealing her purse. And now warnings are going out in the San Gabriel Valley. Keep your guard up. KCAL 9 Inland Empire reporter Nicole Comstock is live tonight in San Gabriel with this stunning video. Nicole?
Well, Susie, a man that witnessed the robbery tells us the victim hurt her head, her arm, and her leg when the suspect took her to the ground right inside this market. The grocery store is in a shopping center that many families consider safe. But Saturday night, these 3 guys shook that sense of security in a second, ripping this woman's purse right off her arm and dragging her across the floor. It happened inside the 99 Ranch Market in San Gabriel. When we slow down the video, you can see the other 2 suspects in the top right running toward the front door as they see the main suspect snatching her purse.
Lady got hurt from here. Scratched, he saw a little bit of bleeding.
This man, who asked to remain anonymous, witnessed the brazen strong-arm robbery.
So many people around, all the video cameras on.
And that wasn't the end of it. When the suspects got to the parking lot, police say they victimized another woman.
On the way back to their car, they robbed that lady also,
who was shopping with her teenage daughter.
The girl was frightened.
San Gabriel police say both victims were Asian women in their 40s, that the suspects appear to be in their 20s, and the robberies seem like isolated incidents. But the witness we spoke with thinks they targeted this shopping center, which has predominantly Asian-owned businesses and customers, looking for women carrying designer crossbody bags. He says they were walking up and down the aisles beforehand, casing the place.
They just wander around.
Like they were looking for someone to do it too.
Yeah.
He says the violent crimes are a shock to the local Asian community. He's urging them to speak up if they see something suspicious and be aware of their surroundings. And if you have any information about the suspects, the San Gabriel Police Department would like to hear from you. Reporting live in San Gabriel, I'm Nicole Comstock, KCAL 9 News.
Nicole, thank you.
Okay, so just a couple comments on that one. One, you're really vulnerable in the grocery store because this lady's fumbling for checkbooks or credit cards, not really watching the surroundings while she's doing that. The other place you're very vulnerable is when you're putting the groceries in your car. So if you can have somebody with you that's watching your back, or learn to use reflections in car windows and paint jobs to keep an eye on what's going on behind you. Okay. That's just a situational awareness, which is what this whole meeting is about. To let you know what the situation is. Okay, we're going to play that second one.
Plus, food fight. The customer chaos inside a Lower East Side restaurant. You won't believe what workers say sent them into a fury. Good evening. Thank you for joining us at 6. I'm Natalie Pasquarella.
And I'm Chuck Scarborough. Workers say they are terrified to return to that Manhattan fry shop after rowdy customers attacked them over the price of sauce.
Yeah, you heard that right. The wild scene unfolding right around 4 in the morning Sunday at the Bell Fries on the Lower East Side. You see the customers there, 3 of them hurl the glass bottles, a stool, and other items at the employees. 2 of those employees were hurt. News 4's Mark Santia live outside the restaurant with the rest of this story. Mark.
Natalie and Chuck, Bell Fries has been closed since the attack. The co-owner telling us he has 6 employees. They're all scared to come back to work because they're traumatized and scared for their lives. Chaos inside Bell Fries. You're hearing the store alarm wail. Employees paralyzed by fear after they say these customers became enraged and violent when they were told there's a charge for extra dipping sauce for the French fries.
They wanted extra sauce. They didn't want to pay for it. The extra sauce is actually $1.25, $1.75. And it started from there. The minute they told them, hey, you have to leave. Once they say you have to leave, they jumped on them. 20, 30 bottles broken, thrown at microwaves, computers broken. The store disaster when I went there. Everything is a mess.
This woman throws what looks like a can at employees, then others climb over the counter. They whip bottles of sauce at employees, a stool gets thrown, they rip down the pandemic plastic barrier bolted to the marble, but it's not over. They heave metal objects and destroy computers, laughing and clapping. The restaurant is torn apart as a group watches, recording on their phones. Exclusive new video shows employees trying to take cover during the attack. 4 days later, and employees want no part of coming back here.
6 employees we have, they all make a living through that store. We're talking, they have no other jobs. They say they're devastated, they're afraid, they can't, and one of them still doesn't want to leave her home, don't want to get hit. She has a son, she fears her life.
This small business co-owner spoke to us on the phone. He did not want his face shown or give his name, but he did want his message heard. He says Bell Fries here on Ludlow Street, opened right before the pandemic, endured and served the community throughout COVID. They were just getting back on their feet when this happened. He rushed to help to find his store wrecked, then visited his injured employees in the hospital. Now he wonders what's next.
I'm thinking again, is it worth it? Is it worth to do anything in New York City anymore?
3 women were arrested. They're all facing several charges tomorrow. They're set to stand before a judge. We're live on the Lower East Side. I'm Mark Santia, News 4 New York.
Last time I did this video, we got to look at
Destroyed over what? $1.25 for rice. You don't have to buy the sauce, right? So my point is not, I don't want to scare you guys. I want to make you aware. And I brought these things up because we have some people amongst that are vulnerable. Imagine, I got a lady that lives down the street from me. Her husband died. She's old, very frail. If it gets like that, she's not going to the grocery store alone. I'm going with her. Okay. And that's what I'm saying. In your neighborhood, seek out the vulnerable and protect them. Okay. These are things that you can do to make your neighborhood better and your people better. And you say, it's very easy for us to say, oh, we're in this little town in Idaho. That won't happen here. Well, you know what? There's people from all these areas moving in here every day. Most of them are good, but there's a certain number of them that are not. So just be aware when you're out in those places. And if you can help somebody who's vulnerable, I'm not letting that lady go by herself. If I start hearing that stuff going on here, I'm going with her every time. Okay, so moving on. Okay, the next thing on my list, and I've got, like I said, I have these in the back if you want them. Stay aware of the situation, which is what we're doing today. We're making you aware of these things if you weren't already. Maintain your distance from potential threats. That's the best thing you can do, is maintain distance from these things. You remember we had Lou Lang here last Wednesday talking about the Second Amendment? And he said the best way to win a gunfight is what? To not get in a gunfight? So your situational awareness is the most important thing. When you're sitting in your car doing your thing on your phone, you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. When you're fiddling with your keys at the check register, you're not really paying attention to what's going on around you. So try to develop skills, like I said, use reflective surfaces, things of that nature. There are ways to deal with these things. Good idea. And that's the other thing is, talk with the other people here. They'll have a lot of good ideas and maybe even let you know about some good deals. That's also something that would be a welcome thing and part of community. Maintain a strategic supply of food and water. I'm not telling you to go fill your basement up with these things, but especially if you live in an apartment, if your landlord can kick you out in 3 months, don't put 2 years worth of food there. You're not going to push all that in your grocery cart when you get put out on the street. But have some there so that if these things are going on, you don't have to go in the middle of that. Okay. Fortify your dwelling as appropriate. I'm not saying make it the Fort Knox, but make sure you have good locks, beefy doors, especially if you live in a neighborhood that's prone to these things. But these things are happening in neighborhoods that historically uncovering the rarely seen places. Fascinating make sure you have a stash of cash. We talked about those crypto banks and other banks that just seized people's money and they can't get it out. Make sure you have, I would say, a minimum of a month's worth of all your bills that you could get by a month on just cash. That's what I would recommend. I'm not a financial advisor, but I don't think you got to be a weatherman to look out the window and see if the bloody rain is coming down. So I would say have at least some cash on hand in case the bank's closed or you can't get there or there's some sort of hack or something like that. And then this is something that not a lot of people do, but I would highly recommend this. If you go to the truck stops, they still have paper maps at truck stops. Get a map of the town you live in and go through on that map and mark down where all the locations of different resources are around you that are near you. You might go to Winco, but there might be 3 other grocery stores closer to your house than Winco. And if there's a shortage at Winco or a riot at Winco, maybe you can go to the dollar store and get your beanie weenies, or you can go to these other places. Look at those places: drug stores, doctors, grocery stores, mechanics, all those different resources you might need. Mark those down on the map because there may be a time when there's problems in certain part of town that you wouldn't go to your normal sources. So I would highly suggest you do that. And I know the Wright Brothers truck stop has maps of Idaho Falls because that's where I got mine. You might mark down rivers and lakes and canals, that sort of thing too, because that's another source of water. And it's and I'm not saying we're going to have a water problem, but if we had a blackout, and the city's water pumps weren't working, you don't want to walk 5 miles with a wheelbarrow full of jugs when there's a canal just 3 blocks from your house. So map those things out if you can. Maintain your fuel tanks at least half full, as much as you can. It costs the same amount to run on the top half of the tank as the bottom. Next thing is maintain sufficient prescription and over-the-counter medications to get you through a rough spot. If you're one of those people who's on psychotropic drugs, or you have heart medication, or you got high blood pressure medication, or diabetes, maintain a strategic supply of that stuff that'll get you through at least a couple months. If there's a disruption in supply chain, because I don't know, maybe Gavin Newsom says that owner operators can't drive trucks anymore, and that load of insulin is on a ship in Long Beach. Okay. And this would be a good for your mental well-being and even your fitness. Take a self-defense class of your choice. You could do take one of Lou's classes that was here from the gun range, or take a martial arts class, something that will help you with your situational awareness and give you some confidence, because when it comes, there's no warning. Realize that if you're going to be attacked, the attacker always has the advantage because he knows it's coming and you don't. So you're always starting from a place of weakness. You want to be as strong as you can. Or if you're physically not capable, if you're one of the vulnerable, try to find one of your neighbors who will go with you that might be able to protect you. And you can at least be a set of eyes so that they've got eyes in the back of their head. Get in as good a physical condition as you can. Now, obviously, with age, there's limits to that, but I'm not there yet either, but that's my next project. Get in as good a physical condition as you can be. So if you have to run from an attacker, or you suddenly have to do a lot more physical work than you're used to because supply chains are down, that you're up for that. You don't want to have a heart attack doing that. Next thing, get any needed medical, dental, automotive, home maintenance done while you can. I have a car that I got in a little fender bender, and it's scheduled to go in the body shop, and they can't get it in there till September because of parts issues. And it's a really small deal. Then get ready for winter, because this is normal in Idaho. It's going to be here like tomorrow. We only have 2 seasons in Idaho, winter and the 4th of July. So get ready for it. It'll be here. And remember that all that natural gas, places that are having problems, if you're being heated with gas, it may be more expensive this year. So maybe insulate more, or maybe you get a wood stove or something that you can offset some of that. Now I said to reach out to your neighbors earlier, and I meant that, to try to love those people and help them. But also you want to get some information when you're doing that. Are any of your neighbors carpenters? Are any of them electricians, mechanics, doctors, nurses, first responders, gardeners, people that might be of use during some kind of problem? Also look to see if there's any threats in your neighborhood. There's websites that will tell you if they're sexual predators that live in your area or not. So check those things out. It's just situational awareness. I'm not trying to get you to be scared. I'm just trying to get you to be aware so that you can maintain that distance to danger. If you're seriously concerned about these potential food shortages, especially if they go into the future because of the drought and the problem at Lake Mead, I would encourage you to build a seed vault. If you don't garden, at least have the stuff you need to do it if the time comes that you have to. And then lastly, build an inventory of tools or supplies that you might need. If for some reason you can't, maybe electricians and carpenters are available, but you, for whatever reason, maybe inflation, something like that, can't afford their services anymore, then you might want to at least have a book to tell you how to do that and some basic tools for that sort of thing. So with that, that's into this, and I want to tell you just a really short story about why I did this, because I don't know if you guys ever read the story of Gideon. You guys ever read that story? So Gideon, he was one of the least in Israel, right? And he was hiding from the enemy in a wine press, basically. And this angel comes to him and says, "Hey, you mighty man of valor." And he's going, "What are you talking about? And I'm the wimpiest guy in the wimpiest family in Israel." And he says, "Oh, you're going to take the enemy." And through a course of time, he's got an army of about 22,000 people to go up against a superior force. But the angel says, "That's too many people. So tell all these people that are afraid to go home. Go home." So they all left. So now he's got less people against a still superior force. And then he says, "Well, take all the rest of these guys down to this lake and have them drink from the lake." And so he takes them down to the lake, and he says, the angel says, "Any of these guys that kind of get down on their hands and knees and lap it up like a dog out of the lake, send those guys home." And the guys that pick it up and put it in their hand and drink it out of their hand, that's the guys you're going to fight with. So why would the angel choose the guys that lapped it up in their hand? I know Dennis knows this. Sense of urgency, but also they can see what's going on. If you got your head down in the ditch, you can't see the threats around you. And so you can maintain situational awareness while you're drinking out of your hand. You can't do that if your head's down there. And that's why you'll see, animals, there'll be one on lookout where everybody else has got their head down. So that's all I'm trying to do is make you guys aware of this stuff, because I love you guys and I don't want to see anything bad happen. And we want to prosper through this and be a blessing to the people around us. Okay. And then I just got one editorial thing to say, this is just for fun. President Biden, we talked about him and Hunter a little bit, and he says Hunter is the smartest guy he knows. And I used to roll my eyes about that. And then I started looking at everybody else he knows. Kamala Harris and Kareem Jean-Pierre. And, I think he's probably right. He is the smartest guy, Joe Biden, though. So anyway, I'll leave you with that tonight. Thanks, guys.
Well, that's like I said, tonight's a little bit of a different story. It's a situational awareness. Make sure that we know what's going on and what we can do about it. And I have some things to go through too, and it's going to take a little. I'll hurry as quick as I can. But the one thing, Dave, we need to pay attention to exactly what Dave was saying, and we need to talk to our neighbors and our friends and our families, because he's absolutely right. And building the community, and that's what this is. Not only your neighbors with you, but the community here, and because when things get rough, then we need to know who we can rely on to support us and help us. Who can we help, etc., like that. I'm going to change the tune a little bit, but it's still a little bit dreary and whatnot. But it's more of a political nature, and it's what's happening in Idaho and whatnot. And I'm going to start off with a video. We're videos tonight, but it's things that we're finding across the web. So this one's about property rights, and this is actually happening. It was at a public hearing in Coeur d'Alene, and it's a quick video. Listen to what this guy has to say.
First, I'd like to begin by thanking Spirit Lake for canceling their 4th of July as I recommended last time I spoke here. That showed true initiative and forward thinking. I spoke with Central Planning, and actually they are now considering some LMI on Main Street in Spirit Lake because of the initiative they showed by canceling 4th of July. So just want to make a note there. Now, regarding the discussion tonight, I wanted to note that during the May 10th planning, or the May 10th meeting with the Planning Commission, there was a short discussion about perhaps banning discussion during this process, and as the mayor knows, I'm fully on board with something along those lines. Ways to kind of like dampen the public's ability to comment on these things included making the meetings really long. I really like this kind of creative thinking. I would suggest just moving, as we're doing tonight, public comment to the very end of the meetings and then dragging the meetings out. Now, in California, for instance, we're just going to virtual meetings when convenient. I think that's something that we might also consider doing here. I wanted to note on that topic that the American Planning Association did a study, a survey, and Americans generally answered that they didn't really know what they're talking about anyway when it came to topics like this, and so I think that certainly backs up this notion of just eliminating them from the process as much as possible. Now, we have big projects coming. Everyone knows that. We're well on our way of looking like Portland. I think this blunt tool that we can now use if we pass the General Development Agreement, will allow us, I think, to favor big national developers. I think we want to favor the national developers that have BlackRock on speed dial so that they can just sell subtract housing to BlackRock. The way we do this is through contract zoning. Now, I think through contract zoning, this is what allows us to kind of negotiate and change zoning when convenient. Now, I think that's something we could definitely consider doing, especially for the bigger developers who come here. Now, I believe that the development agreement we're discussing tonight was actually the idea of a Spokane developer lawyer. Now, we should take more ideas from Washington, Oregon, California lawyers. I think that would be an important step towards moving things forward. Here's another idea. Now, I think something we can do is just ban single-family housing. They're doing this, actually. In Spokane, there's a movement to ban single-family housing in Spokane. There's some background first. Minneapolis became the first major city to ban single-family zoning in 2019. That same year, Oregon passed a similar law statewide. Perhaps the most significant change came in California. A new law that eliminates single-family zoning in California went into effect. Now, in Spokane, Ben Stucker, he's the executive director of the Spokane Low Income Housing Consortium. Now, he said the historical context of single-family zoning makes it an equity and a race issue. He also said there's zero reason we shouldn't start a formal process of eliminating single-family zoning now. Now, Councilwoman Katie Burke said single-family zoning is a racist policy, and we could do so much more for our communities. But I like the way Vox puts it, quote, for those localities that cannot be convinced, K-hold, or financially incentivized, more punitive action is necessary. It's time to sue the suburbs. We've talked about the carrots, now here's the stick. The Biden administration must open up the floodgates for civil rights organizations, developers, and its own Justice Department to begin suing the worst offenders of exclusionary zoning. Now, my final big idea tonight would just be one new zone, and it would just be P. It would essentially just be public zoning, and I think we could use this to essentially just expand and abolish private property in Coeur d'Alene altogether. That might seem like big thinking, but I think it would be convenient, and it would get rid of some of the kind of medicine outsiders that we have to put up with. So thank you, everyone, for your time tonight, and have a great evening.
Mr. O'Connell mentioned something about public comment during this process, and I had received an email during the Planning Commission meeting about someone who had concerns about public comment. But the way I read the code, these are public hearings.
They are, and I'm not sure what that was referring to.
Okay, but it just to let you know it was out there.
Yep, okay.
But the public can comment. As
Correct.
much as we don't like it,
Correct.
the public can come.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe it's good to have real long meetings and discourage people.
Sounds good. We always table it and wear them down. That's a joke. Okay. You know, we say no one speaks, sorry. No public input.
Motion to approve.
All right.
This is an agreement between a developer and the city. Does the public really have jurisdiction over that agreement? Because it's between two parties. Why is a third party now introduced? Is
What
that
third party?
the public?
Having a public hearing.
The public.
Having a public hearing.
The public on a two-party agreement. Why is the third party introduced?
It's not necessary.
Okay.
The statute does not require that.
One question I have for the group to see what we think about process. So as Randy was saying, the state statutes don't require that we have a public hearing. I think if it's done with a development request coming to you, it makes sense. It's just kind of tied together. But in the instance where we have a condition in the project and we say it should have a development agreement, to have to schedule another hearing seems a little clunky in the process.
Hear those council people, and they didn't say, I mean, it didn't bother them what that guy said. Pardon? Yeah. A little closer to home. Teton Valley. I don't know whether people have been aware of that, but they're looking at some land use changes over there. Actually got approved. And and this thing here says it's a sad day in Teton Valley. I was over there a few weeks ago asking them what is this all about? And the summary of it is they basically are limiting the size of parcels that a person can buy. In other words, instead of say you used to have acre lots and 2.5 acre lots, things like that. No, the minimum is anywhere from 7.5 acres to 20 acres. That's exactly right. And what it is, and you look at this, and you look at this group, and here's this group, VARD, okay, and the next one, it's the I forget what the acronym is. The next link there, it's the Teton Valley Advocates, and the Valley Advocates for Responsible Development. Now you go to this, and this is what I would encourage everybody to pay attention to. You read their mission statements and all that, and it all sounds good. It all sounds good and wonderful. We want to maintain open spaces. We want to maintain this and that for the public, and we want to do this. You know, that is a lie. The result of this, and if you look at it, in my mind, factually, what it is it is driving it is making the Teton Valley available to elitists. You have to have a net worth of many, many, many millions of dollars to be able to even be there anymore. And that's what they're working on.
Our son-in-law is a manager for a landscape company here, and he will take a crew up to the Teton Valley to do projects for these super rich people. And so I keep asking him about it because he is up there, he sees everything, and he says what is happening is the billionaires are moving into Jackson Hole, and they're pushing the multimillionaires up into Teton Valley. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening. And you start looking, and they talk about, and I was at a meeting, like I say, a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was just before this public hearing was held, and asking people, and there was talks about affordable housing and workforce housing. And my question was, what's the difference between what did they mean by affordable housing? And what they meant was affordable apartments instead of a single family house or anything like this. They needed an apartment that could be, around, less than $2,000 a month for people to live in. That was affordable. Linda, you had a...
And the Methodist church down the street had a bunch of land, and they allowed it to be given to the town for affordable housing. And when the affordable housing was brought in, it was said that the local people would be able to have these places for the local people, except that the people that moved in were from Manhattan and Puerto Rico. The local people never got in.
Get it down.
Well, but we're live streaming. So.
I'm sorry. So, also, I think on this is they've canceled any manufactured homes to go into the valley, and then they also making stipulations on RVs being parked next to these homes.
Actually, I think that document was 180 pages long. I mean, I saw it was sick, and it was huge. It had restriction in it, like if you owned a business and none of your work equipment could be seen from the street at all, and your work truck of it, and almost the way some people interpreted saying is if you had a work truck that had your name on it, you had to park it in the garage or in your shop or something back out of the way. So it is hugely restrictive. The key, and I was talking affordable housing, the difference between affordable and workforce housing is where an employer can build housing, but his employees have to live there. He can't rent it out to somebody else. So there's a lot of issues there, but not once. And there was a gentleman there that was wondering, he'd lived in the valley for a long time, so he was sort of fortunate to have the property and stuff, but his daughter wanted to move in, be close to family and all that. And she was a physician's assistant. There was no place in the valley that she had a hope of really being able to afford to come and live, let alone buy a piece of property to put a house on. What's happening here is truly the elitists are making it so they can enjoy the valley. Open spaces and all that, you can't go through private property. You know, you've heard of people saying they want to preserve public property. But you know what? If that public property is surrounded by private property, you're not getting into it. And that's the problem that we're having. This is happening in our own backyard. So we need to pay attention. I'll say this. We see all these apartments going in around. They are not local developers. And they are, most of them are not. There are some that are, but most of these, you know, big, huge developments, it's outside developers coming in, building a lot of leasable properties. Okay? That guy mentioned Agenda 2021. What that is, and you've heard of the World Economic Forum and all that, you know, you'll own nothing and be happy. That's the intent, and that's what they're pushing. Real quick, next one, I'm going to jump into education. The National Education Association, you know, we have some challenges in our schools. And the teachers union and these associations really causing, we really need to listen to what's going on and what their agendas are. And I'm very serious about this. I'm not going to read these articles. I will try to put up and send out all of these links that Dave and I put up so that everybody can have them. And I'll try to start putting out again a summary report of these meetings because I think it was helpful. But this is one of the things that it says. That this lady advocates to reclaim public education as a common good. Oh, sounds good. And then transform it into something that was never designed to be racially and socially just and equitable system. Okay? That prepares every student, everyone to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. I mean, you need to look at what they're saying and what the little words in, but they say a lot of the good things. The Supreme Court is moving Americans away from religious freedoms and towards school prayer. I mean, that's a quote, okay? And I'm going, okay. Away from universal public education and towards public funds for private school vouchers. Away from reproductive rights and towards the reversal of women's rights, workers' rights, the rights of LGBTQ plus people, etc., etc. This is the National Education Association. Okay, this is what's running our public schools. The next one, and I'm just going to throw these up. This is to make sure that we're aware of it, and this is stuff that's out there that people that are from reputable sources, so that people can see. If you've never heard of the Gateway Pundit, you ought to go look at it. It's actually a pretty good news source. It's like I say, I would advise everybody to go ahead and look from CNN, Fox, Newsmax, Gateway Pundit. There's a thing called out there before it's news. Look at all sources because somewhere in there's the truth. And you need to look at these things. Again, this is where the agenda includes, their agenda includes mandatory masks, mandatory vaccines, banning the words mother and father, okay, in education. To me, there's something fundamentally wrong with that, okay? You can start looking at a lot of these things. This is our education association. The next one is the NEA proposes a resolution to change mother to birthing parent. Okay. I actually saw at the sake of time, I decided not to pick it up, but there was a senator that was arguing with a professor about whether a man could become pregnant. Okay, and it was interesting. I was just disgusted about it. Some of the things in this article says normal people. Let me see how. Yeah. Normal. Okay, and this is people speaking out against it. Normal people don't use the term chest feeding or birthing person or anything like that. Okay, and so, the National Education Association, they are arrogant. They are dismissive of the family and the parents. Beyond Orwellian. The past resolutions of the association support reparations. The association acknowledges that both historical and current practices have systematically advanced and privileged people of white European ancestry while disadvantaging and denying rights, opportunities, and equality to people of color. And a resolution for justice, is said, it's a institutionally racist systems is what they're calling our school. So the National Education Association is out to change things. I see that as a problem in my mind. But that's not a national perspective, right? Next one. Idaho Education Association. Okay, have you heard of the initiative that they're pushing? There's the initiative, and this is article right here is actually, you can go down, they're actually celebrating that they got the signatures to be able to have it on the ballot this November. And what it is it's a $300 million initiative, which would require the state to allocate at least another $300 million to public education in the state. Okay. Now, it sounds like a good deal. And actually, if you read things, it sounds mighty nice. What's the next one? And by the way, and I'm going to get there. See this? Commonly known as Reclaim Idaho effort. I'm going to get there in just a quick second. This is where you really have to look at things and pay attention. Okay, now they're supporting this, and you read these things and it sounds really nice. Now who is Reclaim Idaho? So go ahead and click to that link, and that goes to the Reclaim Idaho link. Okay, and it's all about this $300 million initiative. Well, also, Reclaim Idaho was behind the expansion for Medicaid. Okay, but you look at all of this, and I've actually had people at the library out there promoting this from Reclaim Idaho. It sounds wonderful. Spend lots of money on, education. Our kids deserve it. Don't they deserve it? We need to. We spend less than every other state per kid and all this. I mean, you hear every excuse in the world. Okay, now I want to roll up a little bit. No, the other way. Reclaim Idaho. Deborah Silver is the treasurer. Okay, now I looked up to say, okay, who is her? I've read some things about Reclaim Idaho and done some poking and whatnot, and the words sound good, but then you start looking at what it is. But what the $300 million? How do you get that? Somebody asked how you get that. It's going to be taxes, and it's building big government, more big school. This is from Idaho Chooses Life. Deborah Silver is a Democrat. She's been a politician and all that. She's a huge advocate for Planned Parenthood and abortions and stuff. It doesn't take long to be able to start looking through these organizations. Reclaim Idaho sounds good. Dig into them and find out who are they. Take Back Idaho is another organization. and they say, oh, we're going to do this because, we have all these bad people, these ultra right wingers or whatever that are just out of control. People need to do your research to say, who are these people? Who are the people that these things are supporting? I will guarantee this, that if Reclaim Idaho is pushing an initiative, it is not for the benefit of the child. It is for the benefit of the organization. It is for the benefit of the bureaucracy, and is for the benefit of socialism and of the elitists. Well, that's why we need a whole lot of new things. What can we do about it? First thing we need to do is we need to try to figure out how we need to get our kids out of public school. That's a hard thing to say, and I see mostly grandparents here, probably. We need to figure out how to get our grandkids out of school, out of the public schools, because right now things are in a motion that is going to really affect us, and it's going to hurt our children, and it's going to destroy our country. We need to figure that out, and it's going to be grandparents and parents and all of us trying to figure out how do we save our children, because that's what it's all about. Another step. This one I thought was a little funny. Planned Parenthood. Roe versus Wade was overturned, and Idaho has a pretty restrictive abortion law. Yay! Idaho Capital Sun. If anybody knows who Idaho Capital Sun is, you get a lot of press put out from them. You need to research them. It actually comes out. They're associated with out of Washington, D.C. and all that. East Idaho News just loves to reprint things from Idaho Capital Sun. You'll see it all the time. This article is thousands of women, Idaho women, cannot travel for abortions, cannot leave the state. Okay, go to some other state. Why? Because they're on parole or probation. Darn. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But this is a whiny article saying, oh, we are depriving women that are that are, for whatever, we're depriving women of being able to go get an abortion. And the number they have here is 5,127. And so when you look at some of these articles and stuff and start seeing what they're saying, read what they're saying. And what do they really mean? A lot of people, unfortunately, will look at the first part of that, say 1,000 women cannot travel for abortions. And they'll, oh, well, Idaho's a bad state, whatever. We should do something because of whatever. That's the intent of what these articles are. We need to pay attention to them. Okay. Yeah, that's right. If they want abortion, move to California. This is another article, and I'm not going to read it all, but I read it, and it's as it says in the title there. In the end, it will be the decision of the American people, all of us, everybody, to fight for a constitutional republic or submit to tyranny. And the time is now.
Listening to Glenn Beck this morning, and he had some statistics, and it said that people from 19 to 38 voted, answered these questions, said that 53% of them said the United Nations should overturn our Constitution and rule for the United States. That's more than half. If we lost that generation from age 19 to 38, it's only going to get worse when the rest of these schools and everything keep indoctrinating them. So it's here.
You're right. It is here, and that's why we're doing Constitution Camp. Okay, that's why we're taking the initiatives to start teaching our children and to do this. There was a comment, I forget where. Well, we heard it the last time. I think in the last video we had last week and whatnot. Is the comment was made by somebody that was escaping from a communist country, and at least they had a place to go to. You know what? We are the last stronghold of freedom. And so we need to change. And I'll say this. We need to protect things. The more I'm running into more and more young people in that age range of what you're talking about, you know, actually younger, 17, 16, 17, 18, through the mid 30s, that are starting, and especially the younger ones are saying, you know, this doesn't seem right. And they're starting to push back and wake up, and we need to promote that, and we need to help them. And so I'm hopeful. I'm more than hopeful. I'm confident that we will be able to turn this around. We just have to. But again, and I would encourage people, I'll post this, like I say, I'll send a note out with this to everybody. Read these things that I put up there, because to me, they meant a lot to me, and they reflect what we're up against right now. The stand up. The memes first. The stand up meme. You know, not that one, the other one. Huh? The one that you've been using. The one of the guys standing up. The one you've been having this one. You know, this is a thing that's pretty simple to rhyme, but it means a lot. It really is. And I saw this, and I really liked it, and I'm going to keep it and keep using it. You know, we're in a situation where a lot of us were standing up and doing, and life was okay, but somebody decided that they were going to rule. They decided that they could control us. And so what they do? They started doing it. They said, oh, we're having a pandemic. We're having a whatever. You can do this. You can't do that. And what are we doing? We're bound down. But you know what? What it takes is just a few to start, to stand up against that. And if we all stood up, what happens? You know, we are the majority, and we will prevail. We will prevail. The next one. I've stated this before, and this happens to go along with, you know, while we're working and helping each other and all that. I actually got slammed. I put this on when I was campaigning. I put this on my campaign page, my campaign Facebook page. I got fact-checked by Facebook. Okay? It says, no, ants will kill each other no matter what. I don't care. That's fine. It was half true. A lot of you have heard me say this, but I'll read it real quick. If you go to the Southwest desert and catch 100 red fire ants, as well as 100 large black ants, and put them in a jar, at first nothing will happen. However, if you violently shake the jar and dump them back on the ground, the ants will fight until they eventually kill each other. The thing is, the red ants think the black ants are the enemy, and vice versa. When in reality, the real enemy is the person who shook the jar. This is exactly what's happening in society today. Liberal versus conservative, black versus white, pro-mask versus anti-mask. The real question we need to be asking ourselves is who's shaking the jar and why. And I would contend this: if we do not ever want to get into a position where we are where war comes to our soil and we're fighting amongst each other. We need to recognize who is our enemy. And I guarantee that my enemy is not in this room right now or listening to me on my live stream. Who is our enemy? We know who they are. And those are the ones that we need to focus on. And if there is ever a time that we have to do that, don't fight amongst ourselves. Like the previous thing, we stand together, we will prevail. I truly believe that. I've become a fan of Paul Harvey over the last little bit. Okay, I used to listen to him when I was younger, and I found him again. I have another little clip that I'd like to play. If we can. It's about 10 minutes, but it's a pretty good one, so.
Americans, the how and the why of our beloved republic are so much better known and understood than the who. The United States of America was born in 1776, but it was conceived 169 years before that. The earliest settlers had watered the New World with much sweat. They had built substantial holdings for themselves, for their families. And when the time came to separate themselves from a tyranny an ocean away, at best it meant starting all over again after the ravages of war. Researching what you're about to hear gave a whole new dimension to my reverence for our nation's first citizens. All others of the world's revolutions, before and since, were initiated by men who had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Our founders had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except one thing. Hello, Americans. I'm Paul Harvey. You remember the cherry tree fiction a long time after you have forgotten the more earth-shaking history-making episodes in the life of George Washington. You have misplaced in your memory the details of Ben Franklin's statesmanship, but you remember his flying a kite. Joyce Kilmer was a great military hero, but the only thing you personally recall about him is his poetic tribute to trees. Maybe of this current decade, that which will be remembered best will not be its wars and its moon rockets or its crumbling frontiers or the giants who lived and died. Maybe all that'll survive to linger in the day-by-day vocabulary of generations yet unborn may be the songs of a Memphis minstrel or the reincarnation of electric automobiles. But for any eve of the 4th of July, I, Paul Harvey, do herewith bequeath unto you something to remember. You may not be able to quote one line from the Declaration of Independence at this moment. Henceforth, you'll always be able to quote at least one line. It's in the last paragraph where you will recall when I remind you. It says, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." In the Pennsylvania State House that's now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the best men from each of the colonies sat down together. This was a very fortunate hour in our nation's history, one of those rare occasions in the lives of men when we had greatness to spare. These were men of means, well-educated. 24 were lawyers and jurists. 9 were farmers, owners of large plantations. On June 11, a committee sat down to draw up a Declaration of Independence. We were going to tell the British fatherland no more rule by redcoats. Below the dam of ruthless foreign rule, the stream of freedom was running shallow and muddy, and we were going to light a fuse to dynamite that dam. This pact, as Burke later put it, was a partnership between the living and the dead and the yet unborn. There was no bigotry, there was no demagoguery in this group. All had shared hardships. Jefferson finished a draft of the document in 17 days. Congress adopted it in July, and so much is familiar history. But now, King George III had denounced all rebels in America as traitors. Punishment for treason was hanging. The names now so familiar to you from the several signatures on that Declaration of Independence, the names were kept secret for 6 months, for each knew the full meaning of that magnificent last paragraph in which his signature pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. 56 men placed their names beneath that pledge. 56 men knew when they signed that they were risking everything. They knew if they won this fight, the best they could expect would be years of hardship in a struggling nation. And if they lost, they'd face a hangman's rope. But they signed the pledge. And here is the documented fate of that gallant 56. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter, trader, saw his ships swept from the seas. To pay his debts, he lost his home and all of his properties and died in rags. Thomas Lynch Jr., who signed that pledge, was a third-generation rice grower, aristocrat, large plantation owner. After he signed, his health failed. His wife and he set out for France to regain his failing health. Their ship never got to France, was never heard from again. Thomas McKean of Delaware was so harassed by the enemy that he was forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in Congress without pay, his family in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery and Clymer and Hall and Gwinnett and Walton and Hayward and Rutledge and Middleton. Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia raised $2 million on his own signature to provision our allies, the French fleet. After the war, he personally paid back the loans, wiped out his entire estate, and he was never reimbursed by his government. In the final battle for Yorktown, he, Nelson, urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, own home, which was occupied by Cornwallis. It was destroyed. Thomas Nelson Jr. had pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. The Hessians seized the home of Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey. Francis Lewis had his home and everything destroyed, his wife imprisoned. She died within a few months. Richard Stockton, who signed that declaration, was captured, mistreated, his health broken to the extent that he died at 51. His estate was pillaged. Thomas Hayward Jr. was captured when Charleston fell. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in all directions for their lives. His fields and grist mill were laid waste. For more than a year he lived in forests and caves and returned home after the war to find his wife dead, his children gone, his properties gone, and he died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris saw his land destroyed, his family scattered. Philip Livingston died within a few months from the hardships of the war. John Hancock, history remembers best due to a quirk of fate rather than anything he stood for. That great sweeping signature attesting to his vanity towers over the others. One of the wealthiest men in New England. And yet he stood outside Boston one terrible night of the war. And he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar, if the public good requires it." So he, too, lived up to the pledge. Of the 56, few were long to survive. 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes from Rhode Island to Charleston sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, or burned. 2 lost their sons in the Army. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died in the war from its hardships or from its more merciful bullets. I don't know what impression you had of the men who met that summer in Philadelphia. But I think it's important that we remember this about them. They were not poor men. They were not wild-eyed pirates. These were men of means. They were rich men, most of them. and had enjoyed much ease and luxury in their personal living. Not hungry men, certainly not terrorists, not irresponsible malcontents, not fanatical incendiaries. These men were prosperous men, wealthy landowners. They were substantially secure in their prosperity. They had everything to lose. But they considered liberty, and this is as much as I shall say of it. They had learned that liberty is so much more important than security, that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom was born.
You know, our forefathers really did put everything on the line. And I guess what I have to say is this is, you know, I'm not afraid. We have our country's at stake, folks. And you know, I'm Doug Toomer, and I will put my name up there. I have talked to people that on their chats and stuff put little, you know, the aliases and whatnot because, oh, well, somebody may find out. Somebody may find out who I am. You know what? These guys laid it all on the line. Be proud that they know who you are. I'm going to be proud that they know that I'm Doug Toomer and I'm going to fight. That I'm going to do whatever it takes to preserve the liberty that our forefathers fought for and sacrificed everything for. And it's time, folks, that we really do stand up and say, I, Doug Toomer, am going to be a pain in somebody's rear. And I'm proud of it, and I'm going to make this happen one way or the other. And with that, I think it was good. There's one thing, it's just a must watch. I'm not going to play it because it's an hour and a half long. But it's a low-budget movie, okay? And it's called The Last Ounce of Courage. It was made in 2012. And it's actually a pretty good movie. It's a Christmas show and all that, but it's 10 years old. And you would be surprised at what that movie's depicting and compare it to today. And, you know, we really do have to reflect on what we have fought for, what our forefathers, what our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, you know, everybody in our military has fought for. And that's what this country stood for. And, you know, we need to really do what we can. We need to do it, and we need to turn this thing around and take our country back. And with that, thank you so much. Next week, we're actually going to have Nick Contos. He's actually the chairman of the Bonneville County Republican Central Committee. You know, we are nonpartisan, but we'll let anybody come in. And this next week, the next few days, is actually the state Republican convention, party convention in Twin Falls. and that's where they basically elect new leadership and do all sorts of good things. And I am a delegate. Full disclosure, I am a delegate, but it is quite interesting. But Nick is going to come and tell us what has happened, and at least for his perspective from the Bonneville County Central Committee's perspective about what he views for at least the next couple of years. So with that, thank you everybody for coming, and I hope to see you next week. And folks, pay attention to what Dave says. It's absolutely right. We need people here. We need to get this community built, and we need to do everything we can